I remember this distinct moment in my life where I was in the bathroom, sitting on the toilet, and thinking, how can death be real? How can all of this truly become nothing one day? It didn't make any sense. And it felt so incredibly shit. And I realized that the fear of death was really what was driving everything that I was doing. My obsession with philosophy, my craving for love, and even all my gaming was actually just about not thinking about the inevitable death of all things. But with age, I learned that this thought that death can't be real, that it doesn't really make sense, was actually pointing to a very ancient wisdom. A wisdom that once seen cannot be unseen, and that would give you an incredible ability to die into each moment with contentment. And I always hate it when you talk about life after death, how it gets always put into this category of esoteric, mystical, and unscientific ideas, as if whatever we call death isn't part of reality, as if it isn't part of science. The universe is full of order and logical coherence, so why would death be the only thing that doesn't follow physical laws? So in this video, I want to make a logical case here for why death isn't real. Why you're actually, quite literally, immortal. We'll also cover what it actually means to die and what death will look like from your own personal perspective. The philosopher Plato knew this, and in his dialogue Phaedo, he makes an incredibly sophisticated argument for why death isn't real. He says that the proper practice of philosophy is about nothing else but dying and being dead. And it's tempting to say, yeah, that's some cool philosophy, man, but now take your pills. But he's actually right. It's just that nobody goes deep enough to see it. So despite me going to sound a bit crazy here, remember that Plato's got my back. So now I just said that you are immortal, and I also said that I'm going to be logical and without mystical superstition. So acting as if I know what biological death is like immediately gets me like 10 minus points in terms of credibility. So how could I make claims of immortality in good faith? How could I act as if I know anything about this? Well, I actually died. I actually died. But wait, I'm here, I'm a body, and I'm speaking to you. So I can't be talking about physical death. I must be playing some sort of word game. Because physical death is usually meant as the stopping of the functioning of the brain. But that's not what real death is anyway. Real death is much more fundamental than this. Before you think I'm simply playing word games, think again. What does death actually mean to you? Because as much as you might say, no, you can't ever have died because death is what happens when the brain stops functioning and there's no return from that, well then, I mean, of course I hear you. According to this definition, I'm clearly not dead. Doesn't make any sense. But you can't immediately say this and then act as if you know what you're talking about. You can't completely admit or say that this is like a valid definition we can investigate. Because according to this definition, there's really nothing more to it. We already know what death is then. The physical body dies and then you die. It's over. But this is clearly not what we mean when we ask what does happen when we die. We already know that's the end of the biological functions, but that's not really the interesting question here, is it? Many make the very big assumption that they just stop existing. You don't know that. Can you acknowledge that you don't know what happens to the sense of self once you die? You have an imagination of what death is like, as if you enter like a black void of nothingness that never stops. But if it's a place you can't access, which doesn't exist, well, you're actually proving my point. How can you die if you can't ever be dead? So the real question is not what happens to the biological body. What matters is what happens to your sense of self and your sense of awareness. Do you really die, or do you keep existing? Because as long as you keep existing somehow, well then you are immortal. We are living in a society and age where we assume that our sense of consciousness is bound by the body, but we still haven't found out scientifically what consciousness really is. And that might have to do with the fact that We want to believe that it's bound by the body. We don't like actually the idea that it's not bound by the body, because it would destroy a lot of assumptions that we make about life. The truth is that you can actually experience death when your sense of self dissolves. It's an experience of death. You can experience this doing psychedelics, doing meditation, doing sleep, a psychotic episode, or literally physical death. The dissolution of your sense of self is the only way you can actually experience death. Because if you define death as the lack of experience, well then of course it doesn't exist. It's talking about nothing at all. It's meaningless. But if you've ever experienced a state where your sense of self has partially or deeply dissolved, you know what I'm talking about. You know that there are experiences out there that go far beyond what your little human self thinks is realistic. So when you experience the dissolution of self, you discover that awareness continues, even when you seem to disappear. You are in a state where you cease to exist, but existence itself keeps happening. It's like consciousness recognizes itself without needing a particular self to do the recognizing. If consciousness can recognize itself without a particular self, what does it tell us about death? The fear of death usually comes from identifying ourselves as this particular body-mind. But it's just obviously, factually accurate that if you die, the world keeps existing. The universe still functions, whether you want it or not. The universe does not depend on you for existence to exist, for consciousness to exist, or for reality to exist. And when you think, yeah, but from my perspective, when I die, everything disappears, all disappears. Does it? Are you sure about that? Are you sure about the last generations not having created certain consequences for this generation? What if, and I know I might be reaching here, what if from your perspective, instead of nothing happening anymore, everything else keeps happening? Because if reality does not depend on your body, well, then it exists independent of any sense of self. And living organisms or identity, it just doesn't depend on the sense of a solid form. And we don't really need to imagine this stuff. It's just true that you can't experience non-existence. And any experience of nothing would still be an experience. Even in dreamless sleep or under anesthesia, you don't experience nothing. You simply have no experience of that time. It's like the lights aren't off. There's just no one there to notice whether they're on or off. This is why death, as complete non-existence, is logically impossible. You can't experience your own non-existence because any experience requires existence. And if you can't experience non-existence, what is it that you're actually afraid of when you're afraid of death? Because you know, even by your own definition, most likely, well then, it's not going to be you. Well, spoiler, you're just afraid of losing yourself. It's all about you. It's all about the sense of self. What death actually looks like is nothing at all. And we can see that. Because death really is nothing. And you can see that when you look at somebody who is dying or somebody is getting killed. It looks like nothing at all. It's just the stopping of biological functions. One more change in reality. Imagine you would die right now, and then you'd be dead for 1 million years. And then, suddenly, after this 1 million years have passed, you become back to life. But in the same precise moment of time when you died. From your perspective, absolutely nothing happened. The experience continued from one seamless moment to another. Since the reality is that existence is. Life always keeps unfolding. So from your point of view, your death will only seem like a seamless experience. Wherever consciousness or reality recognizes itself next is where you will be. There won't be a moment in time where you think, oh, I don't exist right now. I am dead. You will simply wake up to another form of consciousness recognizing itself. You are existence. You are immortal. But wait, you might say, if I'm existence itself, why don't I remember my past lives or other perspectives? And what do you really mean when you say you? Is this particular pattern of consciousness me, or is another particular pattern of consciousness not me? So the word you already carries a lot of heavy lifting. But when I say you, I kind of literally mean everything that exists. The immortality I'm talking about isn't about a personal or your personal story continuing. It's about recognizing that beneath all the stories, what simply is the case is an endless shining light with the ability to identify as anything. You know, when I was sitting on the toilet from the story from the beginning, terrified of just dying or what death could look like, I was really terrified of nothing. What I vividly remember in this moment is how empty it felt, as if I was falling into the space while I was trying to imagine what death is like. As if I was becoming the bathroom and thinking, is this really all there is? Turns out I was afraid of losing something I never really had. I was afraid of losing my separate self. It's afraid of realizing that it already is nothing. This here, your life, this moment, this is what death is like. There's no difference at all between life and death. It's a concept in the mind. So that you survive. So that biology can protect its evolution and make more of itself. Because if you weren't afraid of this body dying, then all this emergent complexity would have not come so far. Why do we have children? Why do we build all of the stuff for future generations? Because these future generations feel exactly as real as you do here right now. There's no difference at all. Just look around. All you see is life. So to become immortal is to stop identifying with a separate self and merge with the emptiness that is around you always. You can't find yourself because you are not something that can be found. You are moving so quick from one experience to another, yet you know despite nothing staying the same, there's still the sense of you. And this deeper sense of you, it is completely impersonal. It has been the same since your birth. And it isn't dependent on any quality that is external to you. It can't be defined and it can't be contained. The identification with your life story as being somehow more important than somebody else's life story, this is what will die. It's the idea that you are somehow special. Because each time you've cared about a new person, you fell in love with a new partner or found a new awesome hobby, each time you wake up in the morning, or even when you spin your head like just 180 degrees to one side to another, you're already seeing how you're constantly dying and transforming into something new. And you can see that there's no thing that you can point to and tell me, this is what stays the same. It's the change itself that stays the same. You are already in a space where you can't know what happens 1 minute from now, 5 seconds from now. The uncertainty of the future and this absolute untouchability of the past is already the case. You don't need biological death for you to see that you are already free falling. There's no stop button, and there never was a stop button. And here, you can find yourself in the present moment, in these continuous fractals of a microsecond. Not quite dead, not quite alive. Simply moving through time and space as this undefinable present. And I know this realization can be deeply destabilizing for some. Certainly was for me. But it does not have to be. If you feel scared of some deeper sense of realization, you can let this fear move through you, through all these sensations that simply are what you're made out of. because you're always safe. Nothing can be done to you. Time eats up everything, so you're never stuck. You want to let go of this desire to control and to see the universe completely autonomous. It acts on its own. You act on your own. You don't need to actively think with your mind to do anything. Your body is already made out of millions of entities that make all of your stuff function. And most of what you think you do is just your subconscious acting itself out. Your thoughts are simply subconscious processes you then identify with. The sense of separate self is simply one other aspect of all of existence. And you can see through it and become free from this mortal identity. When you see you are actually all moments in time and space for all eternity collapsed in an everlasting now, you become immortal.